Hello, I'm Trishna, and welcome to the second webinar in our Omnibus proposal series. We had one a couple of weeks ago, and today I will be a moderator as we dive into the latest updates on the Omnibus proposal, focusing on the approved changes and how they impact sustainability reporting across various industries. In this session, we'll be getting industry-specific insights covering everything from CSRD, CS3D, to the stop the clock mechanism and how the regulations relate to frameworks like ESPR and the action plan for steel industry and probably a few more. Before we jump into it, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Serena Garibaldi. She's our Public Institution Affairs Officer from Circularise. And we have Jiva Vazeri. She's a Policy Research Analyst, also from Circularise. Okay, now a few housekeeping notes. Feel free to use the questions tab throughout the session to submit any questions you have. This will keep us organized as to what questions you're asking and will help us answer your questions. And a quick reminder again that this webinar is being recorded and we will send you the recording after the webinar is done. Okay, so let's get started. I'll hand over the reins to Jiva to pick it up from here.
Thank you so much, Trishna. So also thank you from my side to all of you attending here today. As Trishna said, my name is Jiva. I'm a policy research analyst here at Circularise, and I'll be with you for a part of this webinar today. This is our second webinar on the Omnibus. In the first webinar, we sort of introduced the general overview of this new proposal. However, there have been some recent changes ever since the last webinar. As many of you probably know, the adoption of the stop the clock mechanism, and that's what we will be covering today in this webinar, alongside also the breakdown of some new aspects of the Omnibus. So this is the agenda for today. We will also cover, like Trishna said, some other regulations such as the ESPR and a Steel Action Plan and the interplay they have with the Omnibus and what this means for businesses in connection with other EU legislations, as well as what we can expect in the future and how the Omnibus proposal or more proposals may evolve. So let's get right into it. As an introduction, I will quickly skim over the Omnibus proposals, which have not been approved yet. So these are some content changes which are still waiting the approval. So by now, as you probably know, the Omnibus follows the following EU legislations. So the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or as many of you probably know it, the CS3D or CS-DDD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, the EU Taxonomy Regulation, and the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism or CBAM for short. So the most prominent proposed change here is the change in the threshold. So specifically in CS3D and taxonomy, the proposal is to raise the threshold to 1,000 plus employees companies. And then specifically in CSRD and CS3D, the focus wants to be narrowed to the direct business partners. However, here you need to be very careful because this only applies if there are no known or suspected risk in the supply chain. If there are any risk factors, this does not apply. Moreover, when it comes to the EU taxonomy regulation, next to the proposed threshold to be lifted, there is also a proposed new opt-in approach. In other words, this means that EU taxonomy could be made like a voluntary regulation, which is not mandatory to follow. Last but not least, in regards to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, there is a change in the threshold. So the new minimus threshold would present an exception based on a cumulative mass base of 50 tons per imports per year. And there are some proposed changes to the deadlines. However, these have not been accepted yet. These are not part of the stop the clock mechanism. I would also like to quickly skim through some changes, some aspects which remain unchanged. So there is no proposal for these to be amended. However, there are large parts of the regulations which I have just spoken about. So, for example, the double materiality assessment of the CSRD will remain the same, as will waves 1 and 4 reports regarding the CSRD. I will dive into this more a bit later when I'm talking about stop the clock. But if your company is by any chance in the wave 1 of CSRD reports, your deadline does not change and your scope does not change. So you still need to submit these reports by 2025 by the same standards that you would originally have had to. Moreover, the applicability thresholds and the limited assurance requirement of the CS3D remain the same, as well as, like I just said, the wave 4 CSRD for non-EU companies, as well as the reporting obligation for the CBAM importers above the threshold. These are the aspects that will remain the same as they were before, and there are no proposals to change them. Okay, now that we have covered this, let's take a look of the new approved changes when it comes to the EU Omnibus. So the stop the clock mechanism, who does this apply to? This mechanism applies to two directives, CSRD and CS3D. When it comes to CSRD, it impacts waves 2 and wave 3. However, waves 1 and 4 remain unchanged. It does not touch them, it does not amend them. The deadlines remain exactly the same. Another directive which it impacts is the CS3D directive. Now, when it comes to this, it impacts the application of due diligence measures deadline, and this deadline is now extended for larger companies. The previous deadline would have been in July 2027. Now it's moved to July 2028. Now I will really specifically dive into the CSRD. So like I have just said, the wave 1 remains unchanged. These are the companies which are in scope in wave 1. So these are large public entities with at least 500 employees, which have already obligations to report under the NFRD. The deadline remains unchanged, and companies still need to submit their reports in 2025 for the financial year of 2024 with no delay. Some companies have already submitted their reports, so if you want, you can take a look online for some reports already submitted and what they look like, but you still have time until the end of the year to submit your reports if you fall under this group. When it comes to wave 2, however, there has been a deadline change. So this concerns large non-listed companies and groups that exceed certain thresholds. So for example, either they have more than 250 employees or a net turnover of 40 million or both. Previously, the deadline was 2026 for the financial year of 2025. This has since changed. Now the deadline to report for financial year 2025 is in 2028. So there's like a 2-year delay. This is meant to give companies more time to perfect their reports instead of avoid them or slack. Rather, this time is meant to be spent to really detail your reports. Wave 3, similar thing, has also been impacted. Now this concerns small and medium-sized public interest entities. The deadline for financial year 2026 was previously in 2027. Now this has been, similarly than wave 2, impacted with a 2-year delay. So now the deadline is in 2029 for the financial year of 2026. Now, last but not least, wave 4 remains unchanged. So this concerns foreign non-EU companies which have significant operations within the EU. The deadline for the reports is the same as previously. So in 2029 for the financial year of 2028. These reports, again, for now, the same structure, the same reports need to be submitted as they would have been otherwise in 2029 for the year 2028. Now, at this stage, I would like to carry out a quick poll in regards to obligations post CSRD. For some of you, the deadlines did not change, and for some of you, they might have. I'm interested to know about the implementation of other regulations and requirements, as well as CSRD as well, of course. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Here we're talking about the CSRD requirements, as well as, for example, ESPR or the battery regulation or EUDR and the like. So yeah, I think we have gotten a good idea. Okay, thank you so much. There will be more polls as we go along, and these are to kind of let us know what the market looks like and what our clients are looking for. So I would like to now visually represent this change. This is a visual of a timeline of the changes. So as I previously said, CSRD reporting for 2025 has been moved to 2028. CSRD reporting for 2026 has been moved to 2029. Reporting for 2024 due in 2025 did not change, still remains the same. And equally the same goes for the deadline of Wave 4 reports, which are due in 2029 for the financial year of 2028. When it comes to the CS3D deadline for the largest companies, it has been also postponed to 2028. I hope this is a good visual and that this is now clear, the stop the clock mechanism. I will now give the floor to Serena to tell you more about what the next steps are regarding the Omnibus.
Thank you, Ziva, and once again, hello and welcome everybody. Before going into the next step of the Omnibus proposal, I wanted to have a quick recap and overview of everything that happened so far at the institutional level. So to have, let's say, a complete Omnibus life frame, as this will help us to better understand the future conclusion of the file. Indeed, the European Commission published the Omnibus Package 1 and 2 on the 26th of February, and after this publication, the other institutional body, of course, of the European Union initiated various debates. So we had the European Council addressing the need to finalize the Omnibus procedure by the end of this year, and of course, we have seen the debate in the European Parliament that was followed by the Stop the Clock mechanism that Ziva just explained. And this took place on the 1st of April of 2025. The file passed with a total of 427 votes in favor, with 221 contrary votes and 14 abstention. And this is important because it would likely also represent what will happen in the next vote that will take place in the upcoming months. Of course, the majority of votes in favor were part of the most, let's say, right groups of the European Parliament, together with the Renew group, for those of you who knows a bit about the political landscape of the European Parliament, while the Social Democrat Party and, for example, the more, let's say, left groups actually voted against it. So to conclude this all, the postponement of the due diligence reporting actually entered into force already last week, as it was published on the EU official journal. So it means that member states now will have until the end of 2025 to implement it into their national law. Now, what will happen until the end of this year is that there will be the beginning of the negotiation of the Omnibus package. So the proposal of the European Commission will go initially into the Parliamentary Committee of Legal Affairs, that is the so-called Juri Committee, and they will actually have a first exchange of view tomorrow. And this will be followed by the interinstitutional exchange among the representative of all political groups of the European Parliament, together, of course, with representatives of the EU Commission and the EU Council. So as you can see in this timetable, we will likely see a conclusion, let's say, of the file sort of by the end of the summer, with all the proposed amendments to be submitted by the 27th of June. With the vote in the Juri Committee specifically on the 13th of October, and this will be finalized with the plenary vote in the October 2 plenary, which, just to give a time frame, it will be around the 20 and 23 of October of this year. But This, of course, I would like to stress that it remains a provisional timeline, as it will all depend on the positive conclusion of the agreement of the trilogue negotiation, which is not to be given for granted. In fact, the Omnibus, yes, it was anticipated by the EU Commission in its political guidelines, as well as the later EU Competitive Compass, but it is moving at a very fast pace. And this is not shared by all stakeholders and NGOs, for example, which have very recently lodged a formal complaint saying that the proposal, for example, has been rushed and not based properly on public consultation. So we will have to wait and see what will happen. In parallel to this, together with, let's say, the Omnibus institutional journey, to help companies actually accessing a more clear set of rules. By the end of October, EFRAG, which is the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, will provide some technical advice to European Commission to help the Commission present a delegated act to revise and simplify the existing European sustainability reporting standards. And to actually arrive at this point, EFRAG at the beginning of this month has launched on their website a public call to gather all public information inputs from companies that fall under the due diligence reporting waves that Ziva also just explained, to receive their impression and feedbacks so that those who actually are affected by the new changes can give their voice to it. And to this also, as we kind of already touched upon this, Omnibus, it's not only comprehending of the CSRD, CSDDD and EU taxonomy, but there is also an Omnibus 2 package, and then there will be soon an Omnibus 3. So I was already briefly mentioned, the Omnibus 2 was the file that comprehended the modification to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And in the second half of this year, the Commission will publish a comprehensive review report on this topic that will be followed by a new legislative proposal next year. And for the Omnibus 3, it will be published very soon. It was supposed to come out already last week, but it was postponed in May. And from what we know so far is that there will be some simplification procedure also for the GDPR. And of course, the directives and regulation that are included in the whole Omnibus packages do not constitute the sole legislation that mandates company to take sustainability steps. In fact, as we can see here, we have included the more sectorial EU law that mandates reporting for companies that are active on the EU internal market. So, for example, we have the ETS, which is the emission trading system that requires a company that are high in emission sectors to monitor and report on their greenhouse gas emissions. We have the toy safety regulation that has actually just been concluded as of last week, meaning that the European Parliament will soon vote about it in a plenary session. And this will oblige toy manufacturers and importers to ensure that toys will come with a digital product passport by 2030, including all specification on certain plastic and chemicals that are present. For example, if there is any PFAS or other hazardous materials. Then we have also the CLP regulation that asks company to classify, label, and package hazardous chemicals. The Waste Framework Directive that imposes obligation on waste producer to prioritize waste prevention and ensure proper waste handling and reporting, of course, of data to ensure the circular economy. The Critical Raw Material Act that encourages companies to diversify the sources of critical raw materials and improve traceability and increase recycling overall and reporting in the supply chain. The ESPR, that Siva will go a bit more into detail, of course, later. And then we can also see the EUDR, so this is for the deforestation regulation that requires all operators and traders to ensure that their products are deforestation free. Then we have still for chemicals, the REACH regulation that requires companies to register all the chemicals that they manufacture or import to assess, of course, also their safety and provide data of the supply chain. And then there is, of course, forced labor ban. So always due diligence and evidence from company to demonstrate that there is clean and ethical supply chain. And lastly, it was already mentioned, the battery regulation that once again sets due diligence rules for operator who must verify the sources of raw materials that are used for batteries on the internal market. And on this regard, I would like to ask the audience also like a further poll question. Trishna, if you can help me out. Yes. So which sectoral regulation do you think that poses the biggest compliance challenge for companies? In case your answer should be the latter, please feel free to mention it in the chat so that we know which compliance challenge is the most important to your company. And as regard the options, I've decided to include this specific set of rules because amongst all that were mentioned, in general, products that are part of the chemical and like battery sector, for example, are the ones that are more prioritized when it comes to standardized procedures and traceability requirements. So this is the earliest that will actually come into place in the European Union. Okay. Moving on to the EU Steel and Metal Action Plan. So let's say this is important once again to keep in mind the bigger picture of what it is the European goal. So for those of you, for example, who followed also our previous Omnibus webinar, you may remember that the same day that the EU Commission published the Omnibus file, it was also published the Clean Industrial Deal. And in this, it was announced a range of measures and the need for a concrete action plan for the metal sector that was translated, of course, in the EU Steel and Metal Action Plan. Both of this plan help us understand indeed the direction of the Union, as we can say that they kind of move alongside the Omnibus package that was in fact meant to simplify the administrative procedure for companies, especially of SMEs. But that is to allow companies to grow, and that means to grow towards a decarbonized continent by 2050. So this plan, once again, is in line with the objective of the Green Deal and the circular economy, and it includes a series of pillars among which we can find the need to promote a more circularity for metals in the specific case. So in fact, of course, we know that the recycling can save up to 95% and 80% of energy that is required for primary aluminium and steel production accordingly. It reduces dependency, and most importantly, there will be new investment that will be put into place by the Union, as the goal is, of course, to stimulate the demand of scrap from steel and aluminium, so to increase the reuse of it. So the Commission will set a new targets for recycled steel, also and aluminium, that are in line with the concept there are envisioned in other EU regulation, such as the end of life of vehicles, and also the steel plan will work together with the revision of the REACH regulation. So we know already that in the fourth quarter of 2025, there will be a further simplification of rules for the chemical industry without compromising, of course, the safety and environment protection. So together with this plan, we have seen already that the Clean Industrial Deal will include a new state aid framework that is of 100 billion euros that will be adopted in the second quarter of 2025. And this is, of course, to once again improve the business case for EU-made clean manufacturing. And overall, we're witnessing a very strong link between incentives at EU and national level when more funding opportunities and tax reduction for decarbonization and circularity efforts are granted to companies in the adoption of declaration of carbon intensity. So still on this regard, as you can see in this timeline, we know that the Clean Industrial Deal called for a new Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act that will be published around the end of 2025. And this will develop, for example, a voluntary label on the carbon intensity of industrial product, as well as we will see next year the Circular Economy Act, the European Climate Adoption Act, and so forth. So I hope this gives you a general overview and a more in-depth one, of course, at the same time of what is going to happen and where the priority and the goals of the European Union still lies upon. And now we'll leave the floor back to Ziva.
Thank you, Serena. So quick question, why is traceability and transparency still important? So as Serena just mentioned, there are various regulations and directives in the EU as well as outside of the EU that still tackle this exact issue. So let me pick up, for example, on the ESPR. So this is the Eco Design for Products Regulation. So it has performance and information requirements. So let me just first dive into the performance requirements. So while there are proposals to change the scope and content of the CSRD reports, for example, in the Omnibus, this does not mean that the traceability and transparency can just go out of the window. These are the performance requirements that the ESPR dictates for the products manufactured, imported, distributed in, or sold in the EU. Without such characteristics, products will not be allowed on the EU market. And these slides will be distributed to you, but these are mainly the characteristics that your products should have still in order to be allowed on the EU market. And apart from that, if you're interested in more performance requirements, we actually published a course on the ESPR, which you can find on our website, and it breaks down these product characteristics more in detail. But just for example, the products need to be using less energy, have longer usage period, and you need to be able to prove all of this before you can put your product onto the market. Now, next to the product requirements, there are information requirements when it comes to the ESPR, and this is really where traceability and transparency come into play. So whilst you may not need to submit as extensive reports on your products and operations if the Omnibus proposals pass and are approved, you still need to report similar aspects via traceability tools. So for example, you still need to report on the product information via unique product identifiers and product number or via product numbers or batch numbers. I will talk more about this on the next slide. As well as you need to document all of the performance information. So by this, I mean details on the product, its repairability, durability, expected lifetime, its carbon footprint, and all of this information needs to be up to date. All of this information needs to be stored on a digital product passport. Now, what exactly needs to be in a DPP? For example, one new aspect is the substances of concern. So you need to note down on your digital product passport the identification, usage and handling, life cycle tracking, location, amount of any substances of concern that are present in your product, as well as instructions for use of your product, maintenance, end-of-life treatment, and any sustainability information such as the material composition, microplastics if they are present, or even nanoplastics if there are any present, and its environmental impact. All of this needs to be kept up to date, and it needs to be relevant throughout the entire supply chain of the product, and it needs to be stored then in a digital product passport. For more information on what needs to be on a DPP, because we cannot go fully dive into it right now because it's a big topic, we have various blogs and guides on our website. And DPPs will be mandatory for some companies as early as in 2026. So this is a really good thing to know and have and prepare for. Therefore, at this stage, I would like to ask Trishna to help me with a poll on the readiness of companies when it comes to digital product passport. We are just interested to know what the kind of status quo is. Of course, we understand that it differs per industry when you need to have the digital product passports, but for some is as early as next year and the year after that. So it's always good to be prepared early, also because it takes some time to conduct a digital product passport. Yeah, I see that most companies are thinking about it. Yeah, this is, I think, kind of the transitional stage these years when you transition and start preparing for the impact of the ESPR and its obligations. The ESPR is not impacted by the Omnibus, by the way, if I have not made that clear. So digital product passports will remain mandatory. You will still need to store all of this information. You will still need to remain transparent, and you will still need the traceability throughout your supply chain, even if the Omnibus passes because of the regulations, such as the ESPR, REACH, battery regulations, and so on. Okay, thank you so much for your collaboration. If you do not have digital product passports yet, as I have seen was the most common result, but are thinking about it, we can help you with that. You can get your business values for digital product passports beyond the mere ESPR compliance. We encourage you to treat the DPPs as a new channel to customers and consumers, and a place where you can package all of your product information and reduce time spent on data requests, especially because those will still remain mandatory, just to a different extent. And you can just enable this product service and circularity business model, like a repair, take back, etc., which are mandatory by the ESPR. We at Circularise do way more than just DPPs. We can also help you manage your data across your supply chain. You can use our system to collect and upload supporting documents all in one package. And you can share data effortlessly with your partners instead of dealing with cumbersome email chains. This can also sometimes cause the supplier fatigue, so it's a good way to avoid that. And we can also help you build IC traceability infrastructure. So we can start with a strong software foundation that ensures end-to-end traceability, and it's scalable and ready to grow as your business does. So you can reach out to our amazing team if, as I saw before, you are thinking about getting a DPP or anything else regarding traceability and transparency in your supply chain. Please reach out to us and our amazing sales team. Hopefully this webinar gave you a better insight into the Omnibus, as well as kind of the bigger picture of the evolving landscape of the EU law. We will be doing more webinars on the Omnibus as more changes start rolling in, and also other related topics, so stay tuned for that. We also regularly post on our blog regarding law and business, and also the Omnibus and any changes. So you're welcome to give that a read. It's very up to date. And you can also check out our guides as well as a detailed manual on either ESPR or digital product passports, as I did not have that much time, unfortunately, to go into detail on both of them. We have guides also on any other regulations applicable to you. They're very good at comprehensive. I write them myself. And we have also just launched an ESPR course, like I have previously mentioned, and you can find it on our website and our social media. So subscribe for daily emails on how to prepare your business and supply chain for this new comprehensive regulation. And like I said, if you need any help setting up your traceability and transparency infrastructure, or if you need a digital product passport, reach out to our amazing team. This was it for me. Now I would like to open the floor up to any questions which you might have. Also, of course, with Serena.
Thank you, Jiva.